Tonight on Reporting Scotland, calls for regulation of politicians betting on politics. It comes as the Scottish Secretary Alister Jack admits betting on the election date but denies rule breaking. We'll also be in Shetland tonight, finding out what people there want from their politicians. Also on tonight's programme. The first group of prisoners here have been released early from jail. They were freed today to ease overcrowding. After more than 20 years of digging, work on this ancient archaeological site in Orkney is coming to an end.
And in the sport, we'll have the latest summer transfer news, and Scotland's women's head coach throws his support behind Steve Clarke following the men's Euros exit.
Hello, I'm Laura Miller. Welcome to Wednesday's programme. The Scottish Conservative chairman has called for a review of the rules on political gambling. It comes as the outgoing Scottish Secretary, Alister Jack, admitted placing bets on the timing of the general election. Mr Jack says he did not breach any laws. The SNP says it would also back stricter regulations that could see politicians prevented from betting on political events. Our chief political correspondent, Lindsay Bewes, has more.
And we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
Speculation had been building for months when Rishi Sunak finally named the date. That announcement won the outgoing Scottish Secretary £100. Alister Jack says he placed 3 bets on the timing of the election, but had no prior knowledge of it, and is not being investigated by the gambling regulator. Mr Jack wasn't available for interview today, but on an election campaign visit in Edinburgh, the Scottish Conservative chairman addressed the issue.
What Alister has done is not against the rules. It's down to an individual's judgment as to whether or not they think
Do you think it's appropriate
whether or not they think it's appropriate.
What do you think?
I would not do it myself in relation to placing a bet on an election at this point in time or beforehand, but it's obviously a matter for Alister and other individuals to account for their own decisions.
And he thinks stricter rules should be considered.
And I think there'd probably be a broad political consensus now for us to look again at the gambling regulations that govern politicians and those who work in politics.
That comes after the Conservatives withdrew support from 2 candidates being looked at by the Gambling Commission, and as scrutiny of election betting deepens. Political gambling is big business. One academic expert told us that around £20 million has already been placed on this general election on just one betting exchange. Among those taking a punt, the Scottish Lib Dem leader.
I have placed bets on this election just at the very start, very small, low-level bets on a couple of races around the country, and really just showing confidence in my friends, people I know are working hard and deserve to win. But oftentimes, as with all my kind of gambling in the past, that's with hope rather than expectation.
On the election trail in Inverurie, the SNP's Westminster leader says political gambling is best avoided.
I just assumed that we were all seeking to do the jobs that we're doing in the best interest of the public, to try and improve their lives, not to get any sort of personal gain out of it. So I'm pretty disappointed by what I've seen, and if there needs to be a tightening of rules around all of this, because obviously for sports people it's very clear what they can and can't do, then that's something that I would support.
With one of Labour's English candidates suspended for betting against himself, Scottish leader Anna Sarwar provided assurances.
I'm perfectly confident that all our candidates are behaving appropriately. They're spending all their time, like they should be, persuading people of the positive case for change.
As Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer prepare to go head-to-head in another debate, it's a sure thing they will face more questions over gambling in politics. Lindsay Bewes, Reporting Scotland, Edinburgh.
Well, with me now is our political correspondent, Rajdeep Sandhu. And Rajdeep, this issue does seem to be cutting through with voters, doesn't it?
Yes, we heard today from Scottish Conservative Craig Hoy that it was coming up on the doorstep and people are angry about it. I've been speaking to a couple of other Conservative candidates. One said that they were quite frustrated that this was kind of sucking all the attention away from the kind of policies and the actual issues in the general election campaign. Another said what they were finding on the doorstep was a sort of kind of plague on all your houses kind of feeling from voters who were just disillusioned with politicians in general general. And another person I spoke to today who's worked in Westminster for a very long time was kind of unsurprised and was kind of amazed that this hadn't been a scandal before. And they were saying that there's always been this weird culture of betting in politics, not perhaps for profit in their opinion, but more for the sport of it. But I think this cuts through on a wider issue of that thing on truth and integrity in politics, and I think the long-term worry here for many politicians will be if it does that long-term damage and kind of gets swept up into the kind of lumped in with the expenses or the Partygate scandal and kind of doesn't really does all that damage to trust with voters.
OK, thank you, Rajdeep. The first group of prisoners to be released early from Scotland's jails have been freed today. Over the next 4 weeks, between 500 and 550 inmates will leave custody to ease pressure on the country's overcrowded prisons. People convicted of sexual or domestic abuse offences are not included. The plans were approved at Holyrood earlier this month. Here's our Home Affairs correspondent, David Cowan.
The Get Out of Jail Early card is being handed to a band of prisoners who are already close to release. The hope is it will ease pressure on a system struggling with sky-high numbers. In Scotland's prisons, the target operating capacity should be just over 8,000. In May, the population reached 8,348, the highest since 2012. Today, it was 8,256. Over the next 4 weeks, more than 500 inmates will get out before their original release date. The move will apply to prisoners serving sentences of under 4 years with 180 days or less to serve. People convicted of sexual or domestic abuse offences will be excluded.
Inevitably, some of those released early will go on to reoffend and end up back in prison. And that means for the Scottish Government, this is a big gamble. Ministers have had to balance the risk to the wider community with the risk to everyone inside our overcrowded jails.
Governors can veto anyone who's believed to pose an immediate risk to others. But one organisation which helps people affected by murder and culpable homicide has expressed concern.
If it's anything like what happened during the COVID release of prisoners, then we did find there was an after effect to that. From those prisoners that were released, some did go on to murder.
Scotland's biggest jail is the most overcrowded. A charity which helps prisoners after they're freed was inside Barlinnie this morning.
There's potentially people going to be liberated with no family support, no resources in place, no financial aid, no accommodation. We're already at capacity and underfunded, so we're firefighting every single day, and this is just additional pressure for us.
The Prison Service says it's working with other agencies to ensure the right support is in place. The vast majority who will be freed will be men. An organisation which works with female prisoners expects to help around 40 in the coming weeks.
Because the numbers of women that are being released are relatively low, it means that we do have staff capacity to be in place to support them. So we're assured that we will be able to provide that support for anybody who needs it.
Additional arrangements have been put in place to inform victims if the prisoner from their case is getting out. Long term, the Scottish Government is looking at increasing the length of time prisoners can spend on supervised release before the end of their sentence. David Cowan, reporting Scotland.
A charge on single-use coffee cups, fines for throwing rubbish out of a car window, and a ban on manufacturers destroying unsold consumer goods. Just some of the changes that could come with new legislation that's just been passed at Holyrood. The Circular Economy Bill aims to reduce our impact on the Earth's natural resources. Our environment correspondent Kevin Keane is outside an incinerator in Aberdeen.
Well, the point of this legislation is to avoid sending our waste to places like this. In fact, it's designed to avoid us creating much of that waste in the first place, and that could be through manufacturers reducing the amount of packaging around goods that they ship, through to requiring them to take back goods at the end of their life, what's called producer responsibility. But a lot of the detail of this will come in a circular economy strategy that ministers will have to create within 2 years of this legislation. That will require the setting of targets for reducing reducing, reusing and recycling, and crucially how those targets will be met. Now, things on the table include fines for people putting the wrong things in their household recycling bins. That will be to target persistent repeat offenders rather than people making an honest mistake, through to things like tougher penalties for fly tipping or throwing rubbish out of car windows. Now, the Scottish Government says it will take a proportionate approach in all of this, but environmental groups like Friends of the Earth Scotland say that it is necessary as a shift away from our current throwaway culture.
Kevin Keane reporting there. Now to some of the day's other stories. And NHS Lothian says it's trying to minimise disruption to patients following a power cut at Edinburgh's Western General Hospital yesterday afternoon. 100 patients have been affected so far. Some have had their scans rescheduled, others have been referred to another hospital. NHS Lothian says emergency generators kicked in to ensure continued supply, and the Health Board stresses patients should come for their appointments unless they are contacted directly with alternative plans. A man with severe dementia who killed his wife of 50 years in a violent attack that was wholly out of character will remain in hospital. John Pride, who's 77, had been accused of murdering his wife Catherine at their home in Fishcross in Clackmannanshire in March last year. He was declared unfit to stand trial due to his condition and will be kept at Forth Valley Royal Hospital in Larbert. The council is investigating after a 4-year-old boy was left behind at a wildlife park following a nursery trip. Claire Hodge said staff at Dunmore Nursery in Lochgelly in Fife only returned for her son, Carson Merhulich, 40 minutes after being alerted by the Scottish Deer Centre. Ms Hodge said there were only 9 children and 3 members of staff on the outing and described the incident as astounding. Fife Council said it was treating the matter extremely seriously. OK, let's turn our attention back to the upcoming election now. And taking real action on independence is Alba's top priority, according to leader Alex Salmond, as he launched the party's manifesto. The former First Minister also unveiled plans relating to energy, women's rights and nuclear weapons. Our correspondent David Porter was at the launch.
He's not even standing in this contest, but Alex Salmond is very much front and centre of Alba's general election campaign. Launching the party's manifesto, the priorities are clear.
But it sets Alba out as the radical party of Scotland, the party which is saying yes to Scottish independence in this election campaign.
So what is Alba's offer to the voters? Number one, a renewed push for independence, to tackle cost of living pressures and address child poverty, and a commitment to remove nuclear weapons from Scotland. Alba is fielding candidates in just a third of Scotland's 57 seats. They hope to pick up nationalist voters who've left the SNP, but the real target will be the Holyrood elections in 2 years' time.
Well, the key point for Alba is we're the party with the plan for Scottish independence. We've got a strategy to take Scotland to independence, not asking, beseeching Westminster to grant us a referendum, but by using the next Scottish elections to give us the popular mandate, a majority of the votes, which will be the mandate for Scottish independence.
Alba clearly hope next week's vote will act as a launch pad for 2026. David Porter, reporting Scotland at the Alba Party manifesto launch in Dundee.
Well, elsewhere on the campaign trail, there was no sign of party leader Nigel Farage today, but Reform UK's chairman Richard Tice was in Scotland to promote what he called common sense policies ahead of the general election. The party is standing in all 57 of Scotland's seats, but there's no mention of the country in the contract it's offering voters here. Instead, it's pledged support for the oil and gas industry and promised to ditch subsidies for renewables. Here's our political reporter Jenny Davidson.
Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the chairman of the party, Richard Tice.
Reform UK is promising to scrap net zero targets and subsidies for green energy. At the party's manifesto launch, Richard Tice called moving away from oil and gas negligence of the most extraordinary kind.
I can't think of another nation in the world that's blessed with such huge reserves of energy treasure that voluntarily says, I know what, I'll just leave it underground.
Among the party's other policies is a change to the income tax threshold, so you'd only pay tax on earnings above £20,000. There would be extra funding for the NHS, which would mean budget consequentials for the Scottish Government, and a plan to leave the European Convention on Human Rights. Immigration is another key focus for reform. If elected, the party is pledging to end all non-essential immigration.
This drug-like addiction to cheap labour from overseas reduces the incentive to train British workers, young British people, and it has a cost to society, to our infrastructure.
Security concerns prevented Nigel Farage being in Scotland today.
Britain is broken and Britain needs reform.
The party doesn't have separate Scottish policies, but it says what it offers Scotland is economic growth. Jenny Davidson, reporting Scotland.
Well, there's just over a week to go until polling day, so we're hearing a lot from the politicians at the moment. But we also want to hear from you, and we've been travelling the length and breadth of the country to do that tonight. John Johnson reports from Shetland.
A fresh catch. The seafood sector is the biggest industry in Shetland. It's worth over £300 million to the island's economy. More fish are landed here than in England, Wales and Northern Ireland combined, but the industry is feeling squeezed.
There's lots of policies that's coming out that's affecting fishermen, whether it's closures to fishing grounds from offshore wind or for marine protected areas. Our fishermen just want to be listened to.
Along the pier, the overnight ferry from Aberdeen pulls into Lerwick Harbour. It's Shetland's motorway to the Scottish mainland.
One of the main issues in Shetland is transport, both for people going off the island in cabins, lack of capacity.
I think in the summertime they ought to have an extra ferry on so that there are enough berths for people.
The sun is out, a chance for these pensioners to catch up on a game of bowls.
I'm sure that the burdens could be eased on the whole of Shetland if we could find some way to have a reduction in the electricity prices.
We're generating an awful lot of energy here through the wind farms, plus our oil fields, and we see no benefits at all here in Shetland.
Shetland is closer to the Norwegian capital of Oslo than it is to London. The blue and white Nordic flag flies above the town hall in Lerwick. Nordic-style wooden houses hug the hillside, but a lack of accommodation is a real concern among young people.
With the house prices rising and a lack of social housing, young people feel like they can't get onto the ladder to find a house.
A week tomorrow, the country goes to the polls. When voting closes at 10 o'clock, a huge logistical operation will swing into action. Ferries, pilot boats and vans will all be used to collect these ballot boxes before they're flown to Orkney for the overnight count. As a new political dawn breaks over the UK, Scotland's most northerly returning officer will be keeping a keen eye on the weather forecast to ensure there's no delay to the result from the far north. John Johnston, reporting Scotland, Shetland.
Now, excavation work at the ancient archaeological site at Ness of Brodgar in Orkney has been going on every summer for 20 years. It's filled with huge Neolithic stone structures, and finds there have included some of the oldest known steps in Europe. Well, now digging is coming to an end, and after that, the site will be covered over and become a field once more. Our reporter David Deldy has been for a last look around.
It's easy to see how even 5,000 years ago, this was an attractive location for a complex designed to impress. The site is made up of dozens of stone buildings, not houses but monumental structures. Volunteers have come from near and far.
Uncovering it and getting to see how folk lived all those years ago kind of not only humbles you but makes you feel proud to be Arcadian.
It's a unique experience. I don't think I'll ever experience anything like it again.
It's just jaw-droppingly spectacular archaeology.
I've been a windy cleaner for the last 34 years, so this is very, very different.
Both this way and that, I can see Orkney's famous standing stones, the Ness of Brodgar sandwiched right in the middle. Experts believe that 90% of this site is yet to be excavated, but this will be the last year of digging. The team here say they have come to a natural point to finish, although analysing finds is expected to continue for a number of years. Come the end of summer, this will return to being a grass field.
There's been suggestions we could build a huge dome over this buildings to protect it, but at the same time the cost of that would be astronomical. But also, where would you put foundations? Because basically the whole of the peninsula is covered in archaeology. So it's very sad. It's going to be a very emotional year at a number of levels, but the best thing to do is to cover it over.
When this is covered over, it will bring to an end the latest chapter of a 5,000-year-old story. David Daly, reporting Scotland, Orkney.
OK, let's get tonight's sport now with Amy Irons. And it feels like the domestic football season only just ended, but we're already talking about the upcoming one.
I know, the summer break gets shorter and shorter every year, doesn't it? Thanks very much, Laura. Hello there. We are going to start with some signing news as clubs begin to assemble their squads ahead of the new season. And Hearts have completed a deal for out-of-contract Ross County forward Jan Danda. The 25-year-old has been a standout for County for the past 2 seasons. And Hearts boss Stephen Naismith has described him as one of the most exciting players in Scotland. Scottish football. Well, as one player arrives in Scotland, another one leaves because Celtic winger Sead Haksabanovic has signed a 4-year deal with Swedish champions Malmo. The 25-year-old arrived at Celtic 2 years ago and enjoyed plenty of playing time under former manager Ange Postecoglou, but he's rarely featured since Brendan Rodgers rejoined the Parkhead club and spent most of last season on loan at Stoke City. And the head coach of the Scotland women's team has offered his support to Steve Clarke after the men's side were dumped out of the European Championship following an underwhelming performance in Germany.
In the difficult moments is when you have to show the support. So I want to show all my support to him and the team and the players, or to say, but he has qualified the team previously before. He has done an incredible job, and I'm sure they are going to come back to the best level.
Some rugby news for you now, and Edinburgh hooker Patrick Harrison has described his call-up to the Scotland team as surreal. Harrison will fly out this weekend with the national squad for a tour that takes them from Canada to the USA, then to South America, where they will face Uruguay and Chile. The 22-year-old was playing for Peebles 5 years ago and had to pinch himself when he was called up.
I've been at Edinburgh for, this will be 4 years coming up, so that's been a fair bit of work in the last 4 years. So yeah, it's not, I wouldn't say it's not been that quick, but no, it's been obviously a pretty surreal moment when I got the call. It was actually Greg had phoned me and it was an unknown number. I didn't see who it was, so I didn't answer it. And then when I pulled in, I seen it was his face in the profile pic on WhatsApp. So I was like, I better phone that number back there. So that was pretty surreal.
We've all been there trying to work out who somebody is on WhatsApp. I think if it was Gregor Townsend, you'd be phoning straight back.
Sometimes it is worth it, isn't it? Thanks, Amy. Thanks. OK, Wednesday is debate night, and with just a week to go, it is the final programme before the polls open. Here's Stephen with what to expect.
Debate night is in Edinburgh tonight, in Portobello, on the outskirts of the city. Our studio audience here will be putting their questions to a panel, including Scottish Labour's Ian Murray, Murdo Fraser from the Scottish Conservatives, Marie Todd from the SNP, Wendy Chamberlain from the Scottish Liberal Democrats, and David Kirkwood from Reform UK. Make sure you join us for debate night, 10:30 on the BBC Scotland channel.
Now, just before we head to the weather, if you've seen a few bees flying about your garden recently, you may well have wondered if you have a nest somewhere. Well, hopefully not on this scale. One Inverness homeowner found around 180,000 bees living in the ceiling of his spare room. He called in beekeeper Andrew Card to help. Take a look at this.
Here we have a nice wee bee colony up in Inverness. Spare bedroom, double window. It's quite a big one, this one.
A good colony this time of year should have about 50,000 bees in it. These ones were slightly larger than that. Between the three of them, we were looking at 180,000 bees. Quite a lot of bees.
All in your bedroom ceiling. It's maybe not the best thing for everybody.
It was a spare bedroom. The householder was doing maintenance on it. Every time his grandchildren would visit, they would make mention about listening to the bees at night.
So we cut them out. We use the old bee vac now to start hoovering them out, get the comb out.
We removed the bees by the bee vac, and then we've put them into temporary kind of hives. We then monitor them and feed them for about 6 weeks, and then we overwinter them, giving them the best chance of survival. And next year then that will be used for honey production probably.
I don't think I'm going to go into my spare room ever again, and certainly not peel back the plaster after seeing those bees.
Absolutely, yes. I think they'll need to hunker down tomorrow, yes. With this wet and windy, they'll be buzzing off, I think, Laura.
Yeah.
Back to our classic Scottish summer. Rain, and at times interspersed by some strong winds. Exactly tomorrow's weather. But we did have that humid plume today, and where it did brighten up, we had 24 degrees at Ayrshire. But for many of us, it was overcast with a wee bit patchy rain. And look at this, more of an autumnal satellite imagery. Central pressure, if you had a barometer in the centre of that, low about 980 millibars. It's going to gradually fill as it makes landfall tomorrow, but bring increasingly wet and unseasonably windy conditions. Through this evening and through overnight, we've got this showery bursts of rain along a wee front that's going to edge its way eastwards. Sporadic in nature, but where the bursts occur, some potent bursts, becoming confined to the east and north-east later in the night. Still some misty low cloud in the Northern Isles. A clearer zone follows to the west. That's important because that wee clearer window of weather will afford some morning brightness, but it's gradually going to be eroded, well, fairly quickly from the west, because the spiral bands of rain will work their way into the west and southwest through the morning, increasingly becoming widespread into the afternoon. Central, southern, western Scotland, some really heavy bursts. In fact, you could fill in this map a wee bit more. I think it's a wee bit pessimistic in terms of rainfall. There'll be more of it, I think, widespread, some heavy bursts and also some gusty winds, 30, 40 miles per hour inland, unseasonably windy for the Hebrides. We could be touching 50 miles per hour, perhaps some disruption to the ferries. Downwind at the hills, though, a good rain shadow effect. North Highlands, Inverness, Moray, North Aberdeenshire, some brighter spells here. Could get the mercury up to 20 briefly, but then look for tomorrow evening. More further wet and windy weather to come, especially in the west with coastal gales for the Hebrides especially. The lows continuing to fill into Friday, moves to the north, less isobars in the chart, but still a brisk westerly flow, cool for the time of year, showery bursts of rain frequent in the Highlands through the morning, becoming more scattered into the afternoon. Some brightness, best in the south and east, but fairly limited, and those temperatures fairly suppressed for the time of year. Into the weekend, still will maintain the cloudy skies, occasionally producing some rain, particularly in the northwest, best of the brighter breaks in the south and east, and gradually the winds will be coming down. That's you up to date on the weather front. Laura.
July is going to be amazing though, isn't it?
Yes, I'm sure we'll get a spell by September.
Thank you. OK, now tonight's main news again. There have been calls for regulation of politicians betting on politics. It comes as the Scottish Secretary Alister Jack admits betting on the election date but denies rule breaking. The first group of prisoners here have been released early from jail. They're being freed today to ease overcrowding. And that is Reporting Scotland. Laura McKeever will have your late news around 10:30. Until then, from everyone here, enjoy your evening. Good night.